Hello, my name is Jessica Mahone, and I'll be doing the extra-oral examination. This will include palpation and visually examining. First, I'll observe the head, face, and neck for symmetry and any blemishes. There is a scar on the cheek. The eyes are normal. Then next, I will digitally palpate and examine the hairline. Alright, as I finish up with the hairline, I'm going to visually and digitally palpate the scalp using a cotton tip applicator, sectioning the hair off in about 1-inch sections. And for a time constraint, the sections are slightly larger. Alright, as I finish up with that, I'm going to visually examine and palpate the ear. This is done by digitally, and then I'm going to pull the ear forward and do it looking on the back of the ear. Doing it on the other side, moving my light. Alright, once I am finished with this, I'm going to examine and palpate the cervical chain, having my patient face away from me, chin down, so I can get the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And I'm going to do anterior cervical chain superficially first, and then deep. And then moving on to the posterior cervical chain, beginning with superficial and going deep second. And then doing the same on the other side. So asking my patient if it's okay to move their shirt, and then next examining and digitally palpating the supraclavicular. And then doing the same on the other side. Alright, as I finish up with that, I'm going to visually examine and bilaterally palpate the occipital lymph nodes, having Jamie hold her hair, and then moving to the spinal accessory. Alright, so now I'm moving on to examine and digitally palpate the articular lymph nodes, beginning with the posterior behind the ear and moving to the preauricular lymph nodes in the front. And then doing the same on the other side. Okay, so next I will examine and palpate the parotid lymph nodes. And then moving on to the left side. Alright, so as I finish up with that, I'm going to be examining and palpating the submandibular, pulling the cheek up to have clear vision, and palpating bidigitally. And moving on to the other side. Moving my light. Okay, so next I'll examine and palpate the submental lymph node. Next, I'm going to visually examine and palpate the salivary glands, doing the parotid gland first. And then going on to the other side. And it's just right before the parotid lymph node. Okay, next I'm going to visually examine and palpate the sublingual and submandibular salivary glands, having my patient place their tongue against the roof of their mouth and finding that anaguinal notch, and then palpating from there. Next, I will examine and palpate the thyroid area, giving my patient some water, having her hold it in her mouth and telling her to swallow when I am ready. So first I'm going to visually inspect the thyroid. So if you can go ahead and swallow. Okay, and then take some water and then palpating on the right side, swallow. And then go ahead and palpating on the left side. Okay, go ahead and swallow. Okay, next I'll be visually examining and palpating the sinus area. First the frontal sinus, then the ethmoid sinus, moving my light. And lastly, the maxillary sinus. Now I will examine and palpate the TMJ, listening for any clicking. Having my patient open 3 times. Open, close, open, close, and on this one, move your mouth side to side and close. No clicking was heard. Lastly, examining and palpating the mastoid muscle, having my patient clench to make the muscle more prominent. And this concludes the extraoral examination.